XII. Looked at in this way, the decline of the West comprises nothing less than the problem of civilization. We have before us one of the fundamental questions of all higher history. What is civilization, understood as the organic logical sequel, fulfillment, and finale of a culture? For every culture has its own civilization. In this work, for the first time, the two words, hitherto used to express an indefinite, more or less ethical distinction, are used in a periodic sense to express a strict and necessary organic succession. The civilization is the inevitable destiny of the culture, and in this principle we obtain the viewpoint from which the deepest and gravest problems of historical morphology become capable of solution. Civilizations are the most external and artificial states of which a species of developed humanity is capable. They are a conclusion, the thing become succeeding the thing becoming, death following life, rigidity following expansion, intellectual age and the stone-built, petrifying world city following Mother Earth and the spiritual childhood of Doric and Gothic. They are an end, irrevocable, yet by inward necessity reached again and again. So, for the first time, we are enabled to understand the Romans as the successors of the Greeks, and light is projected into the deepest secrets of the late classical period. What but this can be the meaning of the fact, which can only be disputed by vain phrases, that the Romans were barbarians who did not precede but closed a great development? Unspiritual, unphilosophical, devoid of art, clannish to the point of brutality, aiming relentlessly at tangible successes, they stand between the Hellenic culture and nothingness. An imagination directed purely to practical objects, they had religious laws governing Godward relations, as they had other laws governing human relations, but there was no specifically Roman saga of gods, was something which is not found at all in Athens. In a word, Greek soul, Roman intellect. And this antithesis is the differentia between culture and civilization. Nor is it only to the classical that it applies. Again and again there appears this type of strong-minded, completely non-metaphysical man, and in the hands of this type lies the intellectual and material destiny of each and every late period. Such are the men who carried through the Babylonian, the Egyptian, the Indian, the Chinese, the Roman civilizations. And in such periods do Buddhism, Stoicism, Socialism ripen into definitive world conceptions which enable a moribund humanity to be attacked and reformed in its intimate structure. Pure civilization, as a historical process, consists in a progressive taking down of forms that have become inorganic or dead. The transition from culture to civilization was accomplished for the classical world in the 4th, for the Western in the 19th century. From these periods onward, the great intellectual decisions take place not as in the days of the Orpheus movement or the Reformation in the whole world, where not a hamlet is too small to be unimportant, but in 3 or 4 world cities that have absorbed into themselves the whole content of history, while the old wide landscape of the culture, become merely provincial, serves only to feed the cities with what remains of its higher mankind. World, city, and province, the two basic ideas of every civilization, bring up a wholly new form problem of history, the very problem that we are living through today, with hardly the remotest conception of its immensity. In place of a world, there is a city, a point in which the whole life of broad regions is collecting, while the rest dries up. In place of a type-true people born of and grown on the soil, there is a new sort of nomad, cohering unstably in fluid masses, the parasitical city-dweller, traditionless, utterly matter-of-fact, religionless, clever, unfruitful, deeply contemptuous of the countryman, and especially that highest form of countryman, the country gentleman. This is a very great stride towards the inorganic, towards the end. What does it signify? France and England have already taken the step, and Germany is beginning to do so. After Syracuse, Athens, and Alexandria comes Rome. After Madrid, Paris, London come Berlin and New York. It is the destiny of whole regions that lie outside the radiation circle of one of these cities, of old Crete and Macedon, and today the Scandinavian North, to become provinces. Footnote. One cannot fail to notice this in the development of Strindberg, and especially in that of Ibsen, who is never quite at home in the civilized atmosphere of his problems. The motives of Brand and Rosmersholm are a wonderful mixture of innate provincialism and a theoretically acquired megalopolitan outlook. Nora is the very type of the provincial derailed by reading. End of footnote. Of old, the field on which the opposed conception of an epoch came to battle was some world problem of a metaphysical, religious, or dogmatic kind, and the battle was between the soiled genius of the countryman, noble, priest, and the worldly, patrician genius of the famous old small towns of Doric or Gothic springtime. Of such a character were the conflicts over the Dionysus religion, as in the tyranny of Cleisthenes of Sicyon, and those of the Reformation in the German free cities and the Huguenot wars. Footnote. Cleisthenes forbade the cult of the town's hero Adrastos and the reading of the Homeric poems with the object of cutting the Doric nobility from its spiritual roots, circa 560 BC. End of footnote. But just as these cities overcame the countryside, already it is a purely civic world outlook that appears even in Parmenides and Descartes. So in turn the world city overcame them. It is the common intellectual process of later periods such as the Ionic and the Baroque, and today, as in the Hellenistic age, which at its outset saw the foundation of artificial land-alien Alexandria, culture cities like Florence, Nuremberg, Salamanca, Bruges and Prague have become provincial towns, and fight inwardly a lost battle against the world cities. The world city means cosmopolitanism in place of home, cold matter-of-fact in place of reverence for tradition and age, scientific irreligion as a fossil representative of the older religion of the heart, society in place of the state, natural instead of hard-earned rights. Footnote. Home, a profound word which obtains its significance as soon as the barbarian becomes a culture man, and loses it again as soon as the civilization man takes up the motto ubi bene, ibi patria. End of footnote. It was in the conception of money as an inorganic and abstract magnitude, entirely disconnected from the notion of the fruitful earth and the primitive values, that the Romans had the advantage of the Greeks. Thenceforward, any high ideal of life becomes largely a question of money. Unlike the Greek Stoicism of Chrysippus, the Roman Stoicism of Cato and Seneca presupposes a private income. Footnote. Hence it was that the first to succumb to Christianity were the Romans who could not afford to be Stoics. End of footnote. And, unlike that of the 18th century, the social ethical sentiment of the 20th, if it is to be realized at a higher level than that of a professional and lucrative agitation, is a matter for millionaires. To the world city belongs not a folk, but a mass. Its uncomprehending hostility to all the traditions representative of the culture, nobility, church, privileges, dynasties, convention in art, and limits of knowledge in science, the keen and cold intelligence that confounds the wisdom of the peasant, the new-fashioned naturalism that, in relation to all matters of sex and society, goes back far beyond Rousseau and Socrates to quite primitive instincts and conditions, the reappearance of the panem et circenses in the form of wage disputes and football grounds. All these things betoken the definite closing down of the culture and the opening of a quite new phase of human existence, anti-provincial, late, futureless, but quite inevitable. This is what has to be viewed, and viewed not with the eyes of the partisan, the ideologue, the up-to-date novelist, not from this or that standpoint, but in a high, time-free perspective, embracing whole millenniums of historical world forms, if we are really to comprehend the great crisis of the present. To me, it is a symbol of the first importance that in the Rome of Crassus, triumvir and all-powerful building site speculator, the Roman people, with its proud inscriptions, the people before whom Gauls, Greeks, Parthians, Syrians afar trembled, lived in appalling misery in the many-storied lodging-houses of dark suburbs, accepting with indifference, or even with a sort of sporting interest, the consequences of the military expansion. Footnote. In Rome and Byzantium, lodging-houses of 6 to 10 stories, with street widths of 10 feet at most, were built without any sort of official supervision, and frequently collapsed with all their inmates. A great part of the cives Romani, for whom panem et circenses constituted all existence, possessed no more than a high-priced sleeping berth in one of the swarming anthills called insulae. End of footnote. That many famous old noble families, descendants of the men who defeated the Celts and the Samnites, lost their ancestral homes through standing apart from the wild rush of speculation and were reduced to renting wretched apartments. That while along the Appian Way there arose the splendid and still wonderful tombs of the financial magnates, the corpses of the people were thrown, along with animal carcasses and town refuse, into a monstrous common grave, till in Augustus's time it was banked over for the avoidance of pestilence, and so became the site of Maecenas' renowned park. That in depopulated Athens, which lived on visitors and on the bounty of rich foreigners, the mob of parvenu tourists from Rome gaped at the works of the Periclean age with as little understanding as the American globe-trotter in the Sistine Chapel at those of Michelangelo, every removable art piece having ere this been taken away or bought at fancy prices to be replaced by the Roman buildings which grew up, colossal and arrogant, by the side of the low and modest structures of the old time. In such things, which it is the historian's business not to praise or to blame, but to consider morphologically, there lies, plain and immediate enough for one who has learnt to see, an idea. For it will become manifest that from this moment on all great conflicts of world outlook, of politics, of art, of science, of feeling, will be under the influence of this one opposition. What is the hallmark of a politic of civilization today, in contrast to a politic of culture yesterday? It is, for the classical rhetoric and for the Western journalism, both serving that abstract which represents the power of civilization, money. It is the money spirit which penetrates unremarked the historical forms of the people's existence, often without destroying or even in the least disturbing these forms. The form of the Roman state, for instance, underwent very much less alteration between the elder Scipio and Augustus than is usually imagined. Though forms subsist, the great political parties nevertheless cease to be more than reputed centres of decision. The decisions, in fact, lie elsewhere. A small number of superior heads, whose names are very likely not the best known, settle everything, while below them are the great mass of second-rate politicians, rhetors, tribunes, deputies, journalists, selected through a provincially conceived franchise to keep alive the illusion of popular self-determination. And art? Philosophy? The ideals of a Platonic or those of a Kantian age had for the higher mankind concerned a general validity. But those of a Hellenistic age or those of our own are valid exclusively for the brain of the megalopolitan. For the villages, or generally the nature man's world feeling, our socialism, like its near relation Darwinism, how utterly un-Goethean are the formulae of struggle for existence and natural selection. Like its other relative, the woman and marriage problem of Ibsen, Strindberg and Shaw. Like the impressionistic tendencies of anarchic sensuousness and the whole bundle of modern longings, temptations and pains expressed in Baudelaire's verse and Wagner's music, are simply non-existent. The smaller the town, the more unmeaning it becomes to busy oneself with painting or with music of these kinds. To the culture belong gymnastics, the tournament, the agon, and to the civilization belongs sport. This is the true distinction between the Hellenic palestra and the Roman circus. Footnote: German gymnastics, from the intensely provincial and natural forms imparted to it by Jahn, has since 1813 been carried by a very rapid development into the sport category. The difference between a Berlin athletic ground on a big day and a Roman circus was even by 1914 very slight. End of footnote. Art itself becomes a sport, hence the phrase art for art's sake, to be played before a highly intelligent audience of connoisseurs and buyers, whether the feat consist in mastering absurd instrumental tone masses and taking harmonic fences, or in some tour de force of colouring. Then a new fact philosophy appears, which can only spare a smile for metaphysical speculation, and a new literature that is a necessity of life for the megalopolitan palate and nerves, and both unintelligible and ugly to the provincials. Neither Alexandrine poetry nor plein-air painting is anything to the people. And then, as now, the phase of transition is marked by a series of scandals only to be found at such moments. The anger evoked in the Athenian populace by Euripides and by the revolutionary painting of Apollodorus, for example, is repeated in the opposition to Wagner, Manet, Ibsen and Nietzsche. It is possible to understand the Greeks without mentioning their economic relations. The Romans, on the other hand, can only be understood through these. Chaeronea and Leipzig were the last battles fought about an idea. In the First Punic War and in 1870, economic motives are no longer to be overlooked. Not till the Romans came with their practical energy was slaveholding given that big collective character which many students regard as the die stamp of classical economics, legislation and way of life, and which in any event vastly lowered both the value and the inner worthiness of such free labour as continued to exist side by side with gang labour. And it was not the Latin, but the Germanic peoples of the West and America who developed out of the steam engine a big industry that transformed the face of the land. The relation of these phenomena to Stoicism and to socialism is unmistakable. Not till the Roman Caesarism, foreshadowed by C. Flaminius, shaped first by Marius, handled by strong-minded, large-scale men of fact, did the classical world learn the preeminence of money. Without this fact, neither Caesar nor Rome generally is understandable. In every Greek is a Don Quixote, in every Roman a Sancho Panza factor, and these factors are dominants.